We thank Vasilis Kafatos for this introduction. We proceed to the first session today, the demographic challenge in Greece and the EU. This is an extraordinary session with a very topical theme. And I would like to ask the participants in this session to take their seats. The moderator is Mrs. Maria Nikoltsiou, who will introduce the participants. Good morning. Thank you very much. We proceed directly to our session. I would like to call Mr. Kotzamanis, who have directly come, co-founder and director of the Institute for Democratic Research, Byron, and Professor Platon Tinios, Platon or Platonas, because in Greek we have the cases. Professor of Statistics and Insurance Science, and Mrs. Fay Makantasi, Research Director of diaNEOsis, who are doing excellent things and who have worked on a lot of research for the demographics issue, demographic challenge. We have a chronometer to measure the time. Professor, you will explain what aging means and what it means that I cannot see very clearly anymore. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank the organizers for this magnificent summit. Already yesterday, we have had pieces of news emerging, which for sure constitute very useful material for public debate. Our topic today is the demographic challenge. Either scientifically or humanly, this is one of the major issues which is important for Greece and for Europe as well. I read various titles. The demographic challenge threatens Europe, threatens Greece, strike before we will not have any more Greeks in Greece. Various headlines and either sensational ones or simpler ones. So let's get started with Mr. Kotzamanis. We will have 3 or 4 rounds of questions, 3 to 4 minutes each, in order to analyze as many topics as possible. Let's start from the basics. What is, according to you, the demographic problem that Greece is facing? When we talk about demographics, we're talking about fertility, migration, and if we want to see this challenge, we have to see these actors in the last 50 or 60 years in our country and what are the results. The first component is that we have less children. What does that mean? It means that younger generations, the generations that are having children post-war, are having less children than their parents and grandparents. So in order to be reproduced, there is a limit of 2. We don't have 2 children. We have 1.5. What is the reason for that? There is not a favorable climate for children and families, contrary to other North European countries. We don't want to have 3 to 4 children. We want to have 2. They have 2 there. Here, we don't want to have 2. We have less than 2. The second important point is that we have increased the life expectancy, and that is very nice. We are very happy. So we are aging. We do not die. But at the same time, there is another issue that we don't pay attention to. This life expectancy has increased, but it is increasing at a slower pace than in other European countries. This should be a concern because it is connected to healthy and active aging. In order to have an active aging, you have to be healthy. In order to be healthy, health cannot be built after 65. It is built throughout the life. So we have some demographic indicators, the life expectancy at birth and at 65, which ring a bell that we need to do something in order to have a healthy and active aging. The third issue, which is recent, after the crisis, our country, although in the previous decades we had a balance of entries and exits, after 2010, young people leave the country. They exit the country. People in reproductive age, 20 to 40. So this balance is negative, this equilibrium. We have more deaths than births and more exits than entries. We have a negative balance. The result is that during the last 10 years, our population is being reduced, and it will continue to do so until the next 3 to 4 decades, whatever we do. But there is a difference if it is being reduced by 60,000 or by 20 or 30,000. And the last point that we are not discussing at all is that we have an excessive urbanization, that is concentration of the population in a specific area, which means that we have whole areas in continental Greece that are being emptied. They don't have any population, or they have very, very few, and those very few are the elderly. And on the other hand, we have a very lot of people. We have people who are being concentrated in the two metropolitan areas, Athens and Thessalonica. And these two phenomena, which are the other side of the coin, raise additional problems as regards the resilience of these areas, the areas that are being emptied, and the resilience of the areas where we have over-concentration of the population. And this affects also the climate change. I don't know if we will have time to discuss it. We will discuss it. I wanted to address now, to ask Mr. Tinios. We are discussing this also often. Why should the demographic issue be a problem? Once upon a time, they had a lot of children because half of the children were dead. I remember that my grandfather had 14 siblings. Only 4 survived. I met just 2. My grandfather and his brother. But things have changed, the times have changed, the requirements have changed, and having children is not a first priority, and it is only reasonable because this is how it is. Why shouldn't we change the conditions of our life by seeing the demographic issue not as a problem but as a new situation? Why is it that, Mr. Professor? We have a trend to idealize the past. One can think the drama of your great-grandmother. Now we would say that we have a beautiful family, but that was a family that was living under very difficult conditions due to its size. Now the demographics is like a storm, quite topical issue, a storm about which we have warnings. We know that this aging, the demographic aging, not the individual longevity, these are two different things. We know this from the 80s. The OECD drafted the first book on the risks in the pension system in 1980. We have a lot of time has passed since then. Let's not calculate it. But this is something that is happening. No one can avoid it. I mean, it is impossible to avoid the destiny. So we see, and this is not just for Greece, it is globally a global issue. The whole planet is facing this. The people will be living for longer, and there will be a smaller number of young people children and in adult life, which means what? It is a problem if we keep the same stereotypes and the same roles that were at the time of your great-grandmother. Kennedy, who is quoted often, had said that what we need to do is not to give years to our life, but life to our years. And this is the crucial element. These people, I have exceeded this age, but there is a crucial differentiation done by experts in longevity between young elderly people up to 80 years old and those who are older than that. The young elderly are those, the population group that increases faster. And this population group in the past were sent away, but they have the possibilities now to offer more. And the solution to silver economy is to activate this population group. Thank you. We will come back to you. Before saying what the Analyses is doing, I would like to ask you the same question, because you belong to the young generation. You have given birth to a wonderful son. I don't know if you want to have another child. That is very personal. But you are a researcher, and you are discussing all those topics. And I want you to tell us, to explain, why is the demographics an issue? And why is it not a new situation? And I want to know whether in Greece and Europe, beyond the pension system, if there is a taboo issue that the Europeans will cease to exist as a race, because very simply, the East they are having a lot of children. We are at a time of clash between religions. I wonder whether there is this fear. I try to see the other side of the coin, since, I mean, it is impossible to have 5 or 6 or 7 children. I have 2 children. So why is the demographics such a big issue? And why can't we see it as an evolution, as the professor said, an evolution of history and of the society? Well, first of all, good morning. Very warm thanks for the invitation to be here as a representative of the Analyses to talk about the research findings. And I will answer to the personal comment and your personal question. Yes, I think it would be interesting, says the moderator. It is also very interesting to ask those young people who are sitting there at the back whether they would have children, because they are the young generation. Okay, just a second. Please raise your hands, those of you who are thinking. No one can see you. We are amongst ourselves. Would you have more than 2 children? Who thinks that they would have more, or who would like to have more than 2 children? First of all, that they would have children. Are you there raising your hands for more than 2? Okay, fine. That is very hopeful. Who does not have children at all? And who considers that they are okay with 1 child? Well, this is quite optimistic. I wish you that you meet the conditions, that you create the conditions in your life to have this. Anyone more than 4? Because we have a very good lobby for extended families. More than 4? No. Okay. There are also subsidies by the state. In the past, we had with 1 child you could get a car as a subsidy. Well, according to the diaNEOsis research, well, let me first say that the litigation issue for Greeks is that we don't give birth, or we hear all these titles, but the issue is not right there. The Analyses during these years, having drafted a lot of research and surveys, big surveys on important challenges of the country, the demographic issue, climate change, preschool education, etc., more than 100. We are also having the public opinion polls, that is what Greeks believe, or what they say that they believe. And we ask them, what do you consider as the main threats for the future of the country? With a list of problems, because I don't know if we all have in our mind this idea that demographics is the second. The economic, the financial situation of the country is coming first. And we see that much more than in the previous years. And the second question is, why don't you have children? What are the reasons that prevent you from having children? 80%, the overwhelming majority, state that it is the financial insecurity, economic insecurity, everything related to economic problems. Also that the infrastructures are not there that could help in order to have this balancing, this harmonization between professional and family life and a conducive environment to maternity. But in reality, we need to be clear, and you said it grosso modo, that the cultural model has changed. Yes, because in Sweden you have a social welfare state, but they don't have a lot of children. They are in better positions, Sweden and France, than we are. We are close to 1.3 children per woman in the reproductive age. We are at the extreme low fertility, which means what? It means that the population of a country, ceteris paribus, if the life expectancy and migration do not change, it will be reduced by half at 44 years. Professor Kotzamanis said so already from the generation of the 1940s. We are below 2.1 children per woman, which is the crucial number for the population to remain stable. And the interesting thing, and I will conclude with that, is that in this survey that we did, what Greeks believe and how many children would you like to have, you have 1.4, they answered, quite close to the real average. So they declared that they would like 2.6 children, what the demographers call fertility gap. So we have 1.4, and for women it's at 2.4. So there is this margin. We want to have more children, but we don't have more children because of the economic conditions, etc., etc. So we place man at the epicenter, at the focus, and we have a change in the model compared to your grandfather, as you said.
Right, let's go and have another couple of rounds of questions. I do acknowledge wasting some time, but still, Mr. Kotzamanis, what are the best measures to tackle the problem? Now, the first is our country to create a favorable environment for families and children, which will allow younger generations the number of children they wish and not the number of children they can have. We have documented this very well in our country. There is a big opening as compared to other countries. And I mean, you have 3, correct? Yes, but let's not overgeneralize. I mean, we can have, it's not the problem to have 3 children, it's to have the number of children we want. What do we want is around 2. Others may want to have 2, 3, 4. Others may want to have no children. But it's a choice, isn't it, to have children? Well, it's not to have a policy like Hitler had in 1936 or 1940s to allow the people to have the number of children they want. They want to have at an average 2 children. If they want to have 4, 3, 2, 1, this is feasible. Okay, I mean, if we have good practices and good examples, we have 10 countries. Those who were born in the 80s will have approximately 2. We will have 1.3. This is the first modern thing. The second is that we need to create that environment which will allow the young generations to remain in our country. When we say these generations to remain in our country, we're talking about the inhabitants of our country. And the new generations are not just Greeks, they're also foreigners. Okay, over the past several years, we have the Greeks and foreigners who are not all, and I have to notify this because we're focusing on brain drain, not everyone has a PhD or an MA. So we need to create this environment to smoothen this thing, and we need to allow part of these people to return to our country, not necessarily to their birthplace. And the last thing, in my opinion, and not just for demographic and economic reasons, is to have a country that will receive new foreigners and will allow them to integrate themselves socially and financially, which they haven't done so far. We don't have the time to analyze this, you see. And the last thing is that we need to take care to look at the territorial cohesion of our country. You can't have a country where 70% is, gathered in 2% of the surface. So this weakens the country demographically, socially, and financially, which will lead to a demographic collapse with multiple problems that have to do with the over-concentration, and there are areas that are drained from people and only the elderly remain. We will have significant problems in the resilience vis-à-vis climate change that was not something that we're discussing. This is a new thing that has emerged, which we will need to visit and see how it happens. This, broadly speaking, to leave more time for the discussion. Professor, in a very interesting question that you gave me, I would like you to answer. You say that Greece is one of the worst countries in the EU in respect with the speed of demographic deterioration, but according to the Aging Working Group, the latest report in the EU, we do not have a future problem with pensions, a slowdown in the GDP. How do you explain this? Let's call it a miracle or what? And whether we're done with the social security problem. Well, there's two professors. Well, I think Platon is the one whom I would like to. Okay, let's a bit of a discussion. Let's talk about this give birth, because we're going to disappear. Now, Fay had 4 children. I mean, she couldn't have them at the same time. Nothing would change if she could have them at the same time. Why? Because the key problem is not how many children we have, is that we have very few young women, childbearing women, because in 1980, fertility dropped. So no matter how many children those guys at the end decided to have, wouldn't change anything, because the number of births, okay, I'm not a demographer, I'm not a special demographic, but I think that there are very few adaptations that can happen, and because you see, the main force, main strength has to do with the low number of women in those appropriate ages, childbearing ages. So what they do is they give birth much later. This is my observation. So you see, whenever there are two professors, there's always a discussion, ongoing discussion. Let's move on with the next question. So you see this in today's women, why we have mentioned when we have made some changes that we were forced to make, okay, between 2010 and 2016. So the interesting thing with these changes is that they did not affect that much today's burden of pensions and other expenditure on the GDP as much as reducing it prospectively into the future. How did they do that? By increasing the age limit and the prediction of the age limit and connecting the age limit with the demographic and then the life expectancy. And then by greatly reducing the amount of pensions for those who become pensioners from one point in time onwards. Both these things are commitments for the future that we do not know whether they will be implemented. Okay. Now, the fact that Greece appears to have a problem, but not as big as that of Italy or France, because we have a reduction of the burden on the GDP by 2050. So this contains, as I said, a commitment for the future, which, in my opinion, is rather uncertain. We've seen it refuted time and again. Now, how about a question? Let's go to Mrs. Makantasi, and then I will come back with a few questions. You started talking about research. When they do answer, is the biggest concern how they will have children because there are no incentives, how they will raise them, or how will they have a career? Or is it demographics and pension constitute the biggest problems? I mean, what is the most concerning for these people? Is it the lack of incentives, policy of benefits, or is it the future? Well, the majority says that they will not receive a pension. They will not retire. Well, I feel the same way. Yes, well, a large part of these people want to be retired when they're 60. I don't know whether we have realized where we are and that we will be working till the time we're 70. But they do participate in the protests to not reduce the retirement age. I mean, high school children in France were in the forefront of these protests to have the other way around, okay, about the pension age. Well, high school children should participate in protests. Whenever you protest for something, you really don't understand why you're doing it. But it goes with that age. But the more children we have on the streets, it's good, even if they don't realize why they're protesting. Now, I don't know whether I'm agreeing. Well, I don't agree with myself either, but I'm saying this, okay, because I'm a mother of a young student. Now we have two things that are directly linked to what Byron and Plato said. Since we touched upon the pension issue, the first thing has to do with the labor market. And it is linked with one of the demographic constituents that Byron mentioned, and has to do with migration. I must say that we are second to last in women in the labor market. And this is a big issue, because according to the demographic projections of Byron's laboratories, in 2050, the potentially financially active population, and why we're interested in this indicator, is about those who could potentially work up to the age of 69. They will be 3 to 3.7 million at the time, whereas now it's something like 4.7. What does this mean? Well, it means that we need to introduce people into the labor market. How does one do that? Well, we need to find out how we can enhance and strengthen women and empower them to join the labor market. And it's a myth to say that a working woman will not have children because she's working. This has been debunked. I mean, I was an anchor woman. I was presenting the news on a Friday evening, and I gave birth on a Saturday morning, and I went back to work the following week. Well, you're definitely an outlier, but definitely what is needed is a positive environment to support women in the first period of time, because not everything is pink like we see in the movies, you see, and I'm saying this as a mother. Now, although I do have a child, I feel like I have several, because it's very difficult to combine all these things. But I would like to raise migration, apart from the introduction of women in the labor market, and I will talk about the benefits and the incentives you get. Now, migration. To be 10 million in 2050 on the basis of the optimistic scenario, because on the basis of the intermediate we will be 8.8 million in Greece in 2050. It means that we will need to integrate 750,000 immigrants, approximately 30,000 immigrants per year. I mean, surely a source is brain drain, and how this will be reverted into a brain gain, how we can attract the population of Greeks who left abroad and who who actually produced 50 billion and paid 13 billion in taxes where they are, whereas the Greek state spent 8 billion to educate them. So we need to see how this human capital will come back, and this exsanguination of the human capital will be repatriated and will start contributing to the economy. Now, in births, this is a big issue because it has to do with the ages. And Platon also referred to the aging of fertility. We keep having children at a higher age. 1 in 4 children is by women aged between 35 and 39. The average of births for our first child is 31, one of the oldest one alongside Luxembourg and Spain in the EU. And we have a very big issue in the spatial or regional dimension. I mean, even the policies we have, and obviously demographics is a horizontal problem in our country, or an issue if we don't want to call it a problem, if we're okay with the fact that 30 or 40 years later the population of this country will have been reduced by 40%. If we're okay with that, then fine. But we definitely need to see these policies to link this with the financial incentives. They have a marginal improvement, okay? There's a marginal impact on demographics. What these modern trends in family policy are two things. First is the end of maternalism. the participation of the father in the active rearing of the child that has been linked to the second birth, and the Scandinavization, which means that we need to give generous leaves of absence to both parents, but also infrastructures for preschool teaching for the children from 0 to 4, because this is the most neglected tier of education in our country. And it has the biggest return of investments, ROI, for a country. It has been proven by Nobel winner Hagen. So add what you want to share the rest of the time. Now, Hagman, the Nobel winner, has proven that for every dollar invested in the education of preschoolers can yield for a state $360. It reduces socioeconomic inequalities. We in our country do not have a preschool education curriculum. Things are different, the things that they do in Keratsini than they do in the suburb of Kifisia. So this is why I'm saying that this is part of the Scandinavization that we talked about. Sweden, it's in 1.8 approximately. They have a much better fertility index as compared to our country. So it's very important to invest, to put a lot of money and with an efficient and effective and ROI way in preschool education in Greece. Right, we still have another 9 minutes. I would like for our dear professors to share this time between them. And since we have young people here with us, I would like you to take 3 or 4 minutes to give us not so much a technical analysis, but more a prediction and a reading of the situation in the years to come, by evaluating and utilizing the following data. We're living in a never-changing world. Climate change is here. The East is growing. I mean, is it a taboo or not for Greece not being inhabited solely by Greeks? And in a never-changing world, why must we be 10 million and why must all be Greeks? I mean, some things are the way they are. It is what it is. And how should the young generations approach demographics? And I'm not talking about the science of demographics, but the actual situation and condition we will have in the years to come. So in this framework, what are the limits and what can we do? I realize this is a lot, but you have 4 minutes each. I would like not a technical analysis, but a prediction for the next 50 years. Can I have a go? Well, in the next 50 years, we will be older and fewer than how many we are today, and there's nothing we can do. We'll be, well, 1/3 will be over the age of 65, or will it be half? This is an extreme scenario, of course. So what we need to see is that the people who will be at a time to die, they've already been born. The people who will have children in the next 30 years have already born. We know them. What we don't know is how many will stay and how many will leave our country, migration. So this has to do with whether the country will create a positive environment so that more people can have more children. Now, you gave me the opportunity to say this because there's a lot to be done, okay? So it's not just pensions, okay? We need to see how many will have a pension. It is those who are at a working age, but not just them. Primarily, this is what I wanted to say, those who are at an age to work, how many work, because they are the ones who produce wealth. In our country, as Fay said, there is particularity. We have one of the lowest percentages of participation, or rather, out of 100 people who are in a working age, only 67 work and produce, as compared to other countries where 82 work and produce. So we have a significant drawback, which can become a comparative edge if we take measures that will allow to turn 67 into 82. This, at the same time, will smoothen the impact of demographic aging. We have a country where our young are leaving and we can't contain them. So we have migration. And we need to have a rational immigration from foreigners who will be integrated. We didn't integrate them so far, and this is a significant part of the young people who leave are not just Greeks. It's also foreigners, which is why you saw that we have a shortage of work in areas where no PhDs are required. I mean, we can't find workers to gather the olives from the trees. And the last thing, is that, well, wealth is not only produced by those who are to working age, it's produced by those who are working, and we have leeway and we have the margin to increase their number. Second, it's not just produced by the numbers, the sheer numbers, but it's what they produce. It's qualitative. So it has to do with education, with training, with health, skills, and I will close very, very fast. And Mr. Kafatos mentioned it. We have a drawback which we can correct. We are one of the EU countries that have one of the lowest working productions, lowest investment in new technologies, and lowest added value per product produced. Unless we correct these things, even if we didn't have a demographic problem, we would have problems to finance not only pensions, but also education, health, defense. So there are structural problems, you mean, in our country that do not have to do only with whether we are giving birth or not? Yes, we'll need to change them, even if our population were not dwindling and we didn't have the aging. Okay, because we need to build a society for us and our children that will be much better than the one we're living in. Brilliant. Professor? Well, in Greece we have a tradition, and it's not just Greece, to resolve problems through postponement. We knew that we had a demographic problem back in the 1980s. We postponed it, procrastinated, and we let the new generation. Well, it wasn't just postponement. We had a very specific political system that was afraid of resolving the insurance social security one. And they were fear, and we gave the burden to the young generation. I mean, whoever tried to resolve this social security problem was removed. Well, we did the same thing during the financial crisis. We let the repayment of the debt after 2033, again the new generation. Then we have the climate crisis that will be born again by this young generation. We have a geopolitical problem with Ukraine and the TAP, with meaning even larger defense expenditure that will be shouldered again by the young generation. So this is something that we constantly do, but we must seriously examine the fact that postponing a crisis and allowing the young generation shoulder it does not mean you can resolve all crises. They accumulate, one on top of the other. We need to find mechanisms through which the older generations will be able to interconnect and to do what they can to help the new generation. This means different relationships between the generations, and generations need to talk to one another. I think that this is a primarily cultural thing. I mean, we must give the floor, but we must also listen to what is going on the other side. These type of close relationships that we have between the generations that may exist within the family, these need to spill over to society as a whole, to become general, not to have generational ghettos that don't talk to each other. Why? Well, because if we do have such ghettos, they will not be able to resolve the new generation problems. There are also technical solutions. You see, the social security and insurance sector exists in order to predict and prevent a problem or to help the solutions. You, as professors, do you listen to the new generation? Do you understand them? Whenever they grace us with their presence in the classrooms, some do, not very often. Well, if they're not going to the classrooms, it's not their fault, is it? Whose fault is it? Well, if we talk with numbers, Mrs. Makantasi, okay, I'd like to say a few things about the climate crisis, because we included this parameter in this multi-crisis environment, which affects our mental health, which if we open that can of worms as well, we will never finish. It's very interesting to see that according to the projections, in 2050, it is estimated that temperature in Greece will increase between 2 to 3.4 degrees Celsius. Now, like everyone knows, temperature is abstract. We can't see it somewhere. What does it mean? This is a great plan. Give yourselves a round of applause for those sitting in the back. 30 seconds to go. Right. For each degree centigrade that temperature rises, the photochemical pollutants rise by 7 to 8%. There is an increase in the need for refrigeration for 4%, so more energy, more CO2 and more pollutants if we don't produce it from clean energy sources, and an 8% increase of mortality from cardiovascular and lung diseases by 12 to 18% for those over the age of 65. And the projection is that 1 in 3 Greeks will be over the age of 65 by 2050. We realize that with climate change, the climate crisis, what burden will be added onto the health system and what this means for that generation. So, conclusion, I think, for the new generation, after thanking our esteemed colleagues, I don't know whether we convinced you or whether we gave you tools or whether we give you the impression that we understand the new generation. At any rate, it is up to you to build a better world with more children if you so see fit and so desire, and for you to create the conditions for your own better world the way you desire it. I would really like to thank Mr. Kotzamanis, Mr. Tinios, our professors, and our beloved Fay Makantasi from diaNEOsis. It is a tremendous subject. It's a big issue. It's very difficult to say all these things, and I would like to thank all of you, and primarily the children who are with us. Do have children. Life is good. Love is good. Fall in love. Reproduce. You're all beautiful. You're all good looking. Be well, stay well. Ladies and gentlemen, dear organizers, thank you very much. Mr. Theodorakakis, I think.